I think there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range of organisations.
The words were delivered without celebration, warning, or debate. In a sealed chamber inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles placed his signature beneath an emergency proclamation naming Princess Anne the new royal protector of Britain. The title had not been heard in modern royal life. Yet within moments, it carried authority powerful enough to unsettle William, isolate Camilla, and force senior courtiers to confront a terrifying possibility. The king was preparing the crown for a crisis he believed had already begun. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles did not rise after signing. He removed his glasses, pressed 2 fingers against his eyes, and let the silence stretch. The emergency proclamation was a formal order issued by the monarch during danger, giving temporary powers to protect the crown. By creating it, the king had turned private fear into public authority. Anne stood opposite her brother, hands locked behind her back. She did not smile, bow, or thank him. Royal Protector of Britain meant more than ceremony. It gave the princess power to coordinate working royals, review security decisions, oversee sensitive family conduct, and act in Charles's name when delay could damage the monarchy. "Are you certain this is what the crown requires?" she asked. The monarch finally looked at her. "It is what Britain may soon require." William received the document minutes before senior officials were told. The prince read the title twice, his jaw tightening at the clause, allowing Anne to intervene when royal conduct threatened public confidence. He knew she could protect his future, but her authority could shape his path toward the throne. When he closed the folder, the sound cut through the room like a warning. Camilla searched the pages for her place and found nothing. The queen consort had no defined role in the emergency structure, and no clear influence over its decisions. Her chair scraped against the floor as she turned toward Charles. He refused to meet her eyes. That silence wounded her more deeply than any sentence. A senior court official then read the decree aloud. When he reached the words, "Royal Protector of Britain," Charles lowered his head. Anne remained motionless, and William pressed one hand against the closed folder. The proclamation referred to recent events affecting the security, unity, and constitutional confidence of the crown, yet named none of them. Only the king and his sister appeared to know the truth. The title had been announced, but the deeper shock was not the authority Anne had received. It was the fear that had driven Charles to give it to her. Behind the proclamation stood 4 people, bound by blood, duty, marriage, and ambition. Charles had created the role. Anne had accepted its burden. William had been forced to measure what it meant for his future. Camilla had been left outside its authority. Each understood the same brutal truth. The royal protector was not merely a guardian of tradition. She could now decide who remained useful to the crown and who had become a danger to it. Anne had spent decades proving that duty mattered more to her than praise. She took difficult assignments, endured pressure without complaint, and refused to feed the drama that often followed royal life. That was why Charles had chosen her. The royal protector was a guardian appointed to defend the stability and conduct of the monarchy during a crisis, and the king believed his sister could use that authority without chasing popularity. Charles remained alone with Anne after the others had left. He admitted that he had trusted her, because she had never once asked him for power. She looked at her brother and answered that this was exactly why the title frightened her. The monarch heard no ambition in her voice, only weight. For a brief moment, the ceremony vanished, leaving 2 siblings facing a burden neither had wanted. Camilla returned to her private sitting room and dismissed every attendant. She removed a bracelet with trembling fingers and placed it down harder than she intended. The queen consort could not understand why her husband had discussed such authority with Anne, but not with her. Her humiliation deepened because the silence felt deliberate. as though Charles had already decided she could not be trusted inside the new structure. William carried his concerns to Catherine. The Prince of Wales was still the direct heir, meaning he remained first in line to inherit the throne. But Anne now held emergency influence beside him. He tapped the same clause again and again, the power to intervene when royal conduct threatened public confidence. Catherine watched him carefully and warned that challenging his aunt would make him appear afraid of being examined. Catherine understood the danger more clearly than he wanted to admit. Anne could become William's strongest defender, but she could also become the one person willing to stop him. The princess told him cooperation was not surrender. It was proof that the future king had nothing to hide. He said little, yet his silence showed the warning had landed. Anne opened the red case alone and read the final words without fear or favor. She closed the proclamation and whispered, "Then no one is exempt." Before evening ended, a sealed briefing reached her desk. The first name inside belonged to the royal family. Anne had accepted the title in silence, but the first file placed before her would force her to choose between family loyalty and the oath she had just made. The emergency proclamation did not begin in the palace chamber, where Charles signed it. Its true origin lay 3 weeks earlier, during a national remembrance ceremony that should have displayed unity. Instead, one missing security instruction, one furious private exchange, and one unexplained change to the royal schedule convinced the king that control inside his own household was breaking down. From that moment forward, Charles stopped asking whether the monarchy was vulnerable. He began deciding who could be trusted to save it. Charles had noticed the warning signs for weeks. Senior royals received conflicting schedules, private decisions leaked before approval, and staff no longer knew which office carried the king's final word. The monarch first blamed pressure and exhaustion, but Anne refused that easy answer. She told her brother in a private conversation that rival households were shaping decisions around personal interests, creating a dangerous gap between his commands and what actually happened. The breaking point came at the National Remembrance Ceremony at Westminster Abbey, a service meant to honor sacrifice and present the royal family as one united institution. Charles had personally approved the arrival order, yet someone secretly changed it. William was held at a side entrance, Anne's security team was redirected, and Camilla was placed at the center of the royal arrival without the monarch's signed permission. Charles noticed the absence immediately. He turned to an aide and demanded to know why the prince had not entered. The official lowered his voice and said the plan had been changed under senior household instruction. The king's expression tightened, but the ceremony had already begun. William remained outside, humiliated, while the family entered without him. Catherine found him near the doorway, furious enough to leave. The princess stopped her husband and warned that walking away would give the person behind the change exactly what they wanted. William stayed, but the future king carried the insult with him throughout the service. Catherine remained close, knowing his silence was hiding something far more dangerous than embarrassment. Anne confronted the truth after the ceremony. She placed the altered schedule before Charles and said, "Someone used your name to overrule your decision." Camilla reacted sharply, insisting the change prevented confusion. The princess did not soften. She answered that order without authority was not protection. It was defiance. No official accepted responsibility. The instruction carried no valid signature, yet several staff members swore it had come from the highest level. That night, Charles placed the false schedule beside a confidential emergency framework, a plan designed to protect the monarchy during internal crisis. He circled Anne's name and wrote, "Prepare the Protector Proclamation." The sealed file later given to her suggested the order had come from closer to the king than anyone admitted. What began as a change in ceremony had become an act of defiance, and Anne was now preparing to confront the person whose influence stood at the center of it. There were no cameras, no courtiers, and no ceremonial smiles when Princess Anne entered Queen Camilla's private drawing room. The door closed behind her, leaving two women on opposite sides of a decision that had split the royal household. Anne carried the authority of the proclamation. Camilla carried years of influence beside the king. Neither intended to retreat. But when the royal protector placed the remembrance schedule on the table, the confrontation stopped being about wounded pride and became a question of loyalty. Anne had requested the meeting before speaking to staff or advisors. She wanted Camilla to hear the concerns directly, not through palace channels. The protector's office was the temporary authority created to review conduct, security, and royal decisions during the emergency. To the queen consort, however, it felt less like protection and more like an accusation. Camilla entered already angry. She believed Anne had accepted the title to place herself between Charles and his wife. The queen stared at the altered schedule as the princess asked whether she had approved the revised arrival order. She answered that she had supported a practical adjustment, but she had never claimed the king had signed it. Anne did not move. She asked why the change had gone forward without confirmation. Camilla struck back, accusing her of treating the family like a military command. She warned that loyalty without compassion could become cruelty. The protector's voice lowered. Compassion, she replied, could not excuse using Charles's authority without permission. Camilla then revealed the source in a private recorded account prepared for the meeting. One senior secretary had presented the schedule as already cleared by the king's office. She admitted she had not verified the approval because she trusted the process, and because the new arrangement placed her at the center of the ceremony. Anne produced a timed message showing the aide had been warned that Charles had rejected the change. The false instruction had continued after the king's refusal was known. That changed everything. Camilla rose too quickly, knocking the edge of a teacup against its saucer. She demanded to know whether Anne believed she had ordered the deception. The princess steadied the cup and answered, "I believe you accepted the advantage without asking what it cost." Anne then imposed the boundary. Every household instruction affecting William, Catherine, or the national schedule would now pass through the protector's office. Camilla heard the decision as a public demotion, even though no one else was present. The queen's final warning came cold and direct. If Anne intended to restrict the king's wife, she would have to explain it to Charles herself. The protector met her gaze and answered that he already knew the evidence and had requested the next meeting. Anne had confronted Camilla as the royal protector, but the greater test would come when she faced the brother who had given her power, and the wife who demanded he take it back. The emergency proclamation appeared to make Anne powerful, but every line of her authority still flowed from Charles. He could strengthen her position, narrow it, or end it with another signature. Yet the king now faced a decision more painful than the original decree. Camilla wanted protection from humiliation. William wanted clarity about the succession. Anne wanted permission to follow the evidence wherever it led. For the first time, Charles had to decide whether preserving peace inside his family was more dangerous than exposing the truth. Charles read his sister's first recommendations alone. He set the pages down, walked toward the window, and admitted to an aide that every choice would wound someone he loved. The protector's office was not a second throne. It was a temporary authority designed to impose discipline, coordinate royal operations, and recommend action when conduct threatened the monarchy. Anne could not replace the sovereign or alter the succession. She could only act because the king allowed it. Camilla entered before the family meeting began. She asked her husband whether he truly intended to let Anne investigate her household. The queen consort said the restrictions already made her appear guilty, even though no final judgment had been delivered. Charles listened, but his silence told her that sympathy would not stop the process. Anne joined them, carrying the evidence. She told her brother that the proclamation would become meaningless if his wife received protection unavailable to everyone else. The princess spoke respectfully, yet she did not soften the warning. Charles had created the office because private conversations had failed. If he weakened it now, every future royal instruction would become open to challenge. The evidence struck harder than expected. William's reduced role at the remembrance ceremony had not been an isolated decision. A chain of instructions had repeatedly limited the prince's visibility at major events, making it appear that he was being moved away from central duties. That mattered because public appearances signaled who carried influence inside the monarchy, and repeated absence could quietly weaken the future king's standing. Camilla stared at the records as Anne explained the second discovery. The private secretary linked to the false order had access to messages from both the Queen's office and Charles's household. That access allowed personal preferences to be presented as commands from the monarch. The Queen consort denied authorizing the pattern, but she could no longer deny that her household had benefited from it. Charles took the proclamation from the table and placed his hand over his signature. "Do what the office requires," he told Anne. "Do not protect me from the answer." Camilla looked away. She understood that her husband had refused to stop the investigation. Anne then announced that one senior household figure would be suspended before the day ended. The first removal was coming, but the deeper damage had already begun. William no longer knew which decisions had truly belonged to his father. Charles had chosen truth over temporary peace, and the first consequence would strike the palace before anyone had time to prepare for it. By midday, the royal protector's authority was no longer symbolic. A senior aide was escorted from the palace. Household instructions were frozen. Private offices were ordered to surrender control of shared schedules. The monarchy's internal machinery came to a sudden halt, and every royal understood the warning. Anne was not there to decorate the crisis with a new title. She was there to cut through it. But the first suspension also unleashed resentment that Charles could no longer contain. Anne moved quickly. She froze every unofficial scheduling order and demanded written approval for instructions involving Charles, William, Catherine, Camilla, or any national ceremony. The Protector's office now had the power to review royal operations during the emergency, which meant private households could no longer issue commands without proof. That mattered, because one false instruction had already damaged trust, and another could make the monarchy appear openly divided. The senior secretary connected to the remembrance ceremony was removed from duty, while messages, calls, and approvals were examined. Camilla watched the advisor leave under security escort. The Queen consort's face hardened as the palace door closed, because Anne's investigation had now entered her household and stripped away the quiet protection that influence once provided. Camilla confronted her husband moments later. She told Charles that the suspension had humiliated her even without a public announcement. The king answered that the damage had begun when his rejected decision was ignored, not when his sister uncovered it. She accused him of allowing Anne to judge her before the facts were complete. He replied that the facts had been incomplete for too long. William demanded answers of his aunt. The prince asked how many of his duties had been altered and how long the interference had continued. Anne told him the pattern stretched beyond one ceremony. He struck his palm against the table, furious that he had spent months believing his father was deliberately reducing his place. The records changed everything. Several instructions limiting William's appearances had never come from Charles. The future king was forced to confront the possibility that resentment toward his father had been built on orders the monarch never gave. Anne then uncovered the motive. The suspended aide had prepared a strategy to increase Camilla's public visibility, while Charles reduced his engagements. The plan depended on fewer central appearances by William and Catherine, allowing the Queen consort to seem indispensable, while the heir appeared increasingly distant. William later crossed paths with Charles in a private corridor. Both men stopped. The king began to speak his son's name, but the prince answered, "Not yet," and walked on. The monarch remained still, carrying the full weight of everything silence had allowed. Anne understood then that removing one aide would never repair the deeper wound. The crisis was no longer about schedules or authority. It was about a father and son who no longer knew which injuries were real. The false orders had been exposed, but the silence between father and son threatened to become more destructive than the deception itself. Late that evening, Charles asked Anne to meet him without advisors, secretaries, or guards inside the room. The proclamation lay between them, but neither spoke about authority at first. They spoke as brother and sister. He admitted that the crown had taught him to delay painful conversations until silence became policy. She admitted that duty had often allowed her to appear stronger than she felt. In that unguarded moment, the royal protector stopped being an office and became the one person capable of telling the king what must happen next. Charles poured the tea himself, but his hand shook as he lowered the pot. Anne reached across and steadied the lid without a word. The royal protector was the temporary guardian empowered to defend order inside the monarchy. Yet in that moment, she was simply his sister, watching a brother struggle with the damage his silence had caused. The king admitted that he had known William felt excluded. He had blamed the tension on ordinary disagreements over timing, duty, and succession, never realizing that others were using the distance between them. Now he feared the prince no longer trusted which decisions had truly come from his father. Anne listened, then told Charles that discipline alone would not repair the wound. Removing an aide could stop the false orders, but it could not erase months of resentment. The protector reminded him that succession meant the lawful path by which the throne passes to the next monarch. If William believed that path was being quietly weakened, then the future of the crown itself would feel uncertain. Charles lowered his eyes. He confessed that he had spent years preparing his son for kingship, while avoiding the conversations that might have brought them closer. Anne answered with painful honesty. Preparation without trust could feel like rejection. The king did not defend himself. He knew she was right. Anne then revealed her own fear during their private conversation. She had accepted the title because she believed her brother was becoming isolated inside his household. Too many people had learned to manage his silence, soften his objections, and reshape his decisions. The protector feared they had stopped obeying Charles and started controlling the space around him. The king finally revealed the proclamation's second purpose. He had not chosen Anne only to stop unauthorized influence. He needed someone William respected to prove that his future had never been secretly threatened by his father. Anne gave her verdict. Charles had to meet his son without Camilla, Catherine, or advisors present. He had to admit what he failed to see, explain what he intended, and listen without defending himself. Charles removed his signet ring, the personal seal representing the monarch's authority, and placed it beside the proclamation. Then tonight, I speak as his father, before I speak as his sovereign. Anne nodded. Before leaving, she confirmed that the palace would announce the aide's removal and explain her mission by morning. The family had finally faced the truth in private, but the next judgment would come from millions watching beyond the palace gates. At dawn, the proclamation escaped the guarded silence of the palace and entered the streets of Britain. Broadcasters interrupted their schedules. Newspapers printed Anne's new title in letters normally reserved for war, abdication, or national mourning. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered beneath a gray morning sky, unsure whether they were witnessing a royal rescue or the beginning of a deeper emergency. Yet one image quickly captured the country's attention. Anne leaving for duty, expression firm, while the palace behind her remained divided. Buckingham Palace confirmed that Princess Anne had been appointed Royal Protector of Britain during an internal emergency review ordered by Charles. The title described a temporary guardian responsible for protecting continuity, discipline, and public confidence when ordinary royal systems had failed. The statement also made one point unmistakably clear. William remained heir, and Anne's authority could not alter the succession. The London Chronicle carried the story across its front page beneath the headline, "The King's Shield." Anne given power to protect the crown. Commuters outside Victoria Station stopped to read as copies passed from hand to hand. Some called the appointment proof that the king had finally acted. Others feared the emergency roll exposed a monarchy far more unstable than anyone had known. Outside the palace gates, an elderly woman pressed a small Union flag against the railings and spoke during a live broadcast. "She has never chased the spotlight," she said of Anne. "That is why people may trust her with it." The remark spread quickly because it captured the strange power of the moment. The woman receiving extraordinary authority was the one royal least likely to celebrate it. Anne heard the praise from the back seat of her car. A radio presenter described the princess as the most trusted member of the family, but she switched off the broadcast before the sentence ended. The protector looked down, deeply uncomfortable with language that made a family crisis sound like a personal victory. William then ended speculation about a royal challenge. In a written public statement issued through his office, the prince expressed complete confidence in Anne's duty and reaffirmed his support for Charles. His words mattered because they showed the future king would not treat his aunt as a rival. For the first time since the proclamation, the succession and the protector appeared publicly united. Camilla faced a very different moment. The queen consort arrived alone at a scheduled engagement, without the king beside her. A reporter called out a question about the emergency appointment. She paused for half a second, then continued without answering. Her silence spoke of humiliation, anger, and a role that had not yet been settled. Public confidence began to steady, but Anne refused to declare the crisis over. Charles, William, and Camilla still had to accept permanent boundaries behind closed doors. Britain had accepted Anne as the king's shield, but the monarchy's final verdict would depend on what happened when the palace doors closed once more. The final meeting did not end with celebration. There was no applause when Anne entered, no victory in Camilla's silence, and no satisfaction in William's guarded expression. The emergency proclamation had exposed manipulation, resentment, and failures of trust at the heart of the monarchy. Yet, it had also forced the family to do what years of ceremony had allowed them to avoid: speak plainly. By the time Charles rose to deliver his final decision, the royal protector had already changed the crown forever. Anne confirmed the investigation's conclusion in a documented report presented to the family. The suspended aide had knowingly continued unauthorized scheduling changes after Charles's office rejected them. The advisor was permanently removed from royal service, and every false instruction was formally cancelled. The royal protector, a guardian responsible for defending internal order during crisis, had completed the task without shielding anyone from the consequences. Charles then issued a written declaration reaffirming William's position as Prince of Wales and direct heir. The title identifies the senior royal expected to inherit the throne. From that moment forward, every decision affecting the prince's national duties would require approval from the king, or, during an emergency, from Anne. The monarch looked directly at his son. He admitted that his silence had allowed others to create distrust between them. William did not offer instant forgiveness. The future king answered that rebuilding trust had to begin with honesty, not ceremony. Then he turned to his aunt and confessed that he had first seen the proclamation as an intrusion into his future. He now understood that she had been appointed to defend its legitimacy. Camilla accepted the boundaries that followed. The queen consort retained her title and public duties, but her household lost independent control over shared royal scheduling. She acknowledged that accepting an advantage without confirming its authority had damaged the family. Her admission did not erase the harm, but it ended the denial that had deepened it. Anne believed the emergency was over. She placed the original proclamation before Charles and said her work was complete. The king pushed it gently back toward his sister. Charles then delivered his final decision. Anne would remain royal protector of Britain, not as a rival to the heir or a second sovereign, but as a permanent guardian of duty, continuity, and family accountability whenever the crown faced danger. The princess closed her hand over the decree. She promised that the office would protect no personality, reputation, or private ambition above service to the country. William and Charles left together for their first private conversation without advisors. Camilla departed separately, her place preserved but clearly limited. Anne remained only long enough to return the proclamation to its case and close it. The crown survived because one woman defended it from division. One king admitted his failure, and one family finally chose truth before privilege. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.